Hi everyone, welcome to this video. My name is Ansurai and I'm software engineer at Postman. Today in this video we are going to talk about the code duplicacy problem and how you can remove the duplicate code using the custom React hooks. So let's come back to the app. So we have a React application, a pretty simple React application which is a counter app, and we have two counters as you can see. And what this will allow us is that if I click on the first counter, you can see that the count of the first is increasing. If I click on the second counter, the count of second is increasing. The thing that you should notice is that both these counters are separate. So let's come back to the code for them and see that the implementation of this application. Coming back to the application, you can see that I have a app.js, and inside this app.js I have created basically two counter components, and I've imported this counter 1 and counter 2. So let's go back to the counter 1. If you go to the counter 1, you will see that inside the counter component we have implemented the business logic to basically store the count as well as to increase the value of the count on the CTA click. If you go to the counter 2, you will see the same implementation here also. What you should notice is that we have basically kept the business logic of increasing the count as well as maintaining the count inside the components. Now, according to the React principles, components are reusable, and mostly if you put a business logic inside the components, it will reduce its scope of reusability, meaning that your components generally should not have the business logic which decide that what need to be shown to the user, right? So what the first thing that we should do is that we should basically get rid of the business logic from the component itself. So for that, let's do one thing. Let's get rid of this thing, the business logic, and what we're going to do is that we should receive the value of the count as well as the increment function from the as a props. And what we're going to do is that on the whenever user perform the click, we're going to attach this increment function on the on click. We no longer need this use state, so let's get rid of this. All right. So now let's do one thing. We're gonna use this counter component to render both our counters, right? So let's get rid of this counter 2. We no longer need it. All right. So now that you'll see that I have removed counter 2, let's remove it from here. And similarly, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to render the counter 1 itself. And now that we have single counter, it makes much more sense to name it as a counter. All right. So now if you go back to the counter, this counter expects the value of the count as well as the function to increase the count from the props. So for that, we need to pass this value from the props. Now here is the catch. In order for us to pass this value as the props, we need to define this value here, right? So for that, we can define the value again in the state, and for that, let's use state. I'm going to initialize the value of the count with the 0. As we all know, the count basically returns an array with two elements. The first is the value and the second is the function which updates the value of the state. Now what I'm going to do is that let's also create a function called increment. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to name it as increment 1, and this one is for the first count. Okay, let's keep it as increment and see what is the problem we will face if I pass the same function to the both counter. This one is going to be an arrow function, and what we're going to do is that we're going to update the count of the value, and here let's rely on the callback. So we'll basically get the previous value from the state, and what we're going to do is that we're going to append increase the previous value by 1, and then we'll update the value of the count. Pretty simple stuff, nothing fancy here. Now what we can do is that we can pass the value of the count as a props to this count component, and similarly we can pass the increment function. Right? Now the question is that can I pass the same thing to the counter 2? Right? So if I do this, let us see what's the problem we will face. So for that, let's come back to the browser. Now if you see here, if I increase this count, you will see that because I'm maintaining the same copy, I'm referencing the same count value in the state and using the same function to update that value, if I click any one of them, the value of the count will increase and that will reflect in the both counters. right? So for that, how can we solve this problem? So for that, what we can do is, let's come back to the code. What we can do is that we need to create one more copy of one more basically variable in the state, and I'm gonna use it. So let's do one thing. Let's give it a 2 and okay, let's give it a 2 and keep the original as it is. Now as soon as I do it, of course, what we can do is that we can pass this value, but now I need to basically create one more function called increment2, and I can pass this increment2 here. And inside this increment2, I'm gonna basically update the set count to value, right? Now this will solve the problem that we had earlier. So let's go back and see if this works. So now if I increase the count 1, you will see that only the first counter is increasing. If I click on the second counter, you will see that the second counter is increasing. Pretty much what all we need. But there is a problem. So this works. There is no problem with the application. It works really fine. But the problem is at the implementation layer. Now if you go and see the one thing that coming back to the code, what you can see here is that you're duplicating the same logic. So your business logic is not getting changed. Your business logic of storing the count as well as maintaining increment function is same. You're duplicating your business logic, and that's the problem. Because the problem with this is that tomorrow if you decide to increase the count by 2, you have to make the changes of your business logic at multiple places, right? Now this is a pretty small application and you have only one level of duplicacy, but with time and with the scale, your duplicacy will keep on increasing, and that will cost you a lot. Another problem is that if you want to write a unit test case, right, it will create your problem. The third problem that it's going to do is that with scale, your application will be unpredictable, meaning that you will not be able to predict your outputs based on the this, even though your business logic is same, because of the multiple copies of your business logic. So how can we solve it? In order to solve this, what we can do is that we can put our business logic in a single function and then we can reuse it. The problem with here is that we need some data and we need to manipulate the data. So for that, we can create a custom React hook. So let us see how can we do that. So for that, let's create a hook. Now one thing that you should notice with the hook is that the hook has two conditions, right? So first one is that I've already created this hook. Let me basically give you a walkthrough of this. So first one is that the name of the hook should also always start with the use. So if you see all the hooks that are present in React, we have a use state, use effect, use callback. All hooks start with the use keyword. Another thing to notice is that basically a hook basically returns an array with two values. One is the two elements. One is the value and another is the function to update that value. So what we're doing is that we're using the use state, we're storing the value of the count and updating the set count, and we have an increment function here. And we are returning the count as well as the increment function. So what we're doing using the custom hook is that this is a use counter hook, which we basically is storing, which have the business logic of working with the counters at a single place, right? Now whenever we need to use this, we need a counter and we need this business logic, we're going to use this use counter hook. So let me explain you how we're going to do it. First thing first, let me import the use counter. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use counter and do this thing here. We don't need to pass this, and we can get rid of this increment functions now. Now what you can do is that here you can basically pass this callback function, and from within this set count you can basically call this set count. You don't need to pass anything because the implementation layer is present inside the hook itself. Now you see here, if you go back to the application and let's see if this works or not. So for that, let's again come back to the browser. And now you see that if I click on here, it is working pretty fine. If I click on here, it is working fine. But the problem I can see is that you can see that the value is getting incremented by twice, and let us see what's the issue there. So coming back to the code, let us see what is going on here. So we have a count, and then we have a count2, and then we have a function called increment, and then we have another function called increment, and we are updating the set count here, and inside the use counter I think I am updating the value by 2. So let's change the implementation and only increment the value by 1. Coming back to the browser, let's see if this solves the problem or not. So you can see that the value is now incrementing by 1, which is perfectly fine. So now the question is that what is the advantage of doing so? What we have achieved by the use of use counter? What we have achieved is that now our business logic is not getting copied. You can see that we are basically using the use counter, and our logic to increase the counter or updating the value of the count or manipulating of the count is not getting changed. It's present inside the use counter itself. It's not getting duplicated. Tomorrow if I have to use one more counter anywhere else, we can basically use the custom hook again, and we will be able to use it. Now another advantage is that if you need to make any changes to your count, let's say that tomorrow I want my counter to be increased by 2 whenever user click on the increment button. For that, all you need to do is that you need to make changes at a single place, which is at the business logic that is present inside the counter, your use counter hook, and that's all you need. So if you now go back to the browser and start testing it out, you will see that now the value of the count should increase by 2. So that's the advantage, because you now don't have a code duplicacy. It will basically always give you a predictable result, and there is no multiple updates involved here. The third thing is that writing a unit test case for this is easier, right? So this is how you can use custom hook whenever you need to basically use a business logic multiple times. It makes sense to basically put that business logic inside a hook if you can do it and use it. There are multiple ways. You can use HOC, you can use render props, but if you're working with function component, creating a custom hook for a shared business logic is way to go. So I hope that you learned something new from this video, and thank you for watching this video.